Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training we're going to be going over the step-by-step instructions and explanation of coaching call number 2, which is going to be about what to eat and a little bit of water in there as well. And so as you already know, we are going ahead and continuing our theme inside of this module of putting your transformation program together. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and hop right into it. Of course, we do have the training outline inside of the explanation guide available for you. So a lot of this is going to be repetition from coaching call number 1. Coaching call number 1 and the explanation of coaching call number 1 really did set you up for success here. So pre-call ritual, of course, we have not yet made it an action step for you to go ahead and put your pre-call ritual together. If you've already gone ahead and done that, which is awesome, great job, bonus points for you. However, as you start to go ahead and get more of a feel of these coaching calls, at that time, that is going to be when we go ahead and assign a specific action step, probably in coaching call number 3, for you to actually go in and put your pre-call ritual together. Of course, like we talked about, it's very important to make sure that you are centered and grounded before the coaching call, because of the fact that the most disrespectful thing that you can do with anybody that you are meeting is being in the middle of something and then showing up in the wrong headspace with your headspace all over the place, right? So we talked about practical preparation right before the call preparation, mindset shifts, and when starting the call, right? So we already talked about all of this, right? Then after that, from the pre-call ritual, we went ahead and talked about organization equals organization. Very important to make sure that you do have all of your notes together. And regardless of how you decide to do it, it's very important to go ahead and make sure you are documenting what you talked to the student about, what it is that was important for them, the progress that they are making throughout your program. And obviously there's a lot of ways that you can do this, but regardless of how you decide to do it, make sure that you are somewhat modeling the coaching call notes template that we provide. As you are going to see inside of this specific explanation, I am going to be really hammering the point home in terms of not being a remote control student. And so at the end of the day, we are here to provide you the foundations, but it is going to be really up to you to be able to suit this to not only your own specific style, your own coaching style, your own personality, but over time really finding your own voice, as well as finding the systems that work best for you, because what works for one student may not always necessarily work for another student. Okay, so that is all about organization. And then after that, I want to go ahead and jump right into the actual coaching call number 2 overview, okay? Because now that we've set up the foundations with the student from coaching call number 1, what we're now going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and dive into the meat and potatoes of the student's health transformation by, inside of this coaching call, talking about the foods that give energy and the foods that take away energy. And so the new information that we're going to be talking about inside of this specific coaching call is going to be the blood sugar roller coaster, and we're going to be relating it back to the foods that actually give or take away energy from the student. And so from this call going forward, you are going to see a more consistent 6-part structure. So unlike coaching call number 1, where we had an altered 6-part structure, it is going to be a lot more consistent going forward from this coaching call, okay? As well as, like we talked about in the previous training, even though we might not always mention it inside of the script, you are going to be using a lot of the skills that you learned in module 4 throughout all of this. So yes, the words on the paper are there, but if you don't actually use the skills that you learned in module 4 and you try to stick too closely to the script, it is going to feel unnatural, because of the fact that the script is really there to provide you the kind of the foundations and the training wheels, right? But you are going to have to use conscious listening, verbal mirroring, paraphrasing, right? All of those things in between the words that make human communication seem natural and actually flow. All of that is going to be required, because just words on a sheet of paper, words on a screen, aren't going to facilitate exactly the natural process of how we communicate, right? So we're not going to mention it every single time in the coaching call explanations, but I do want to go ahead and emphasize that there is going to be a lot of things related to communication and making things flow more naturally that you are going to have to build in as you get more practice over time, okay? So that is the point I wanted to go ahead and make there. And then of course, student action notes, like we talked about from coaching call number 1, each and every single coaching call is going to have its own student action notes. And so that is going to be inside of coaching call number 2 as well. In the resources section below, there's going to be a new action notes document that is going to be specific for coaching call number 2. And then of course in module 6, we're going to walk you through how to automate that and send that and all that stuff. But right now you are going to have the resource for you. Now, the other thing that is going to be different here in coaching call number 2 is going to be a coaching call guide. So unlike in coaching call number 1, coaching call number 2 is going to have a guide that goes along with it. And you can think of a guide as basically kind of like your script with without any words and in images instead. Okay, so it contains basic images that will allow you to be able to explain the new information. So in this case, the blood sugar roller coaster, if you remember in module 3, there were images that went along with that facilitated the understanding of the new information. And so for this guide, you will be able to share your screen and show your students these images as you explain this concept. And so the coaching call guide is also handy if you have specific points that you're like, man, I really want to make sure I don't forget this, right? Really want to make sure that I hit on this. And so you can go ahead and put that text inside of your coaching call guide as well. So you can kind of imagine that your coaching call guide is very similar to the training guides that we used to have earlier in the RWA program. And so therefore you have your images on there, but because we were doing a hybrid program, we had all of the words that we said inside of the guide as well. Obviously, because you are in a one-on-one setting, you won't be really saying or putting all the words on there, but the images will definitely be on there, because it'd be a little bit weird if you were in a one-on-one setting and then you share your screen and literally there's your entire script right there. That's a little bit weird, right? But the coaching call guide is going to be very helpful for that. And so that way you will be able to go ahead and utilize that here in coaching call number 2. And that is going to be inside of the resources section below. Just make sure that you've gone ahead and submitted your student licensing agreement from the previous training. And then of course, when we do get to module 6, when you are working with real students, let us know if you do need help making edits to the images or removing logos or removing copyrights and XYZ, so we can go ahead and make further white label customizations for you to the images. When you start working with real students, we can go ahead and help you with that at that time. Let's go ahead and jump into coaching call number 2, explanation. Of course, we talked already about the zoom in, zoom out feature, so make sure you go ahead and utilize that so that way you don't get lost in the ocean of scripts. And then of course, the format of the explanation, we've already talked about script on the right side, explanation on the left side. I am not going to be going word for word through the explanation, and so you will need to make sure that you go ahead and download this explanation guide that we are actually going through, so that way you can read through it as well, and that way you can go ahead and practice. And then of course, like we talked about, word for word, no, the job of the script is to give you the tools and the ammunition, and so you have all of the frames and ideas that you could convey to the student depending on the situation. You will have to condense and expand according to the time that's taking, according to the student, according to if the student wants to slow down, according to if you decide to do a little bit more curious exploration, depending on if you actually go faster or slower. All of these are factors that are going to be contributing to this. And so that's why it's the art of coaching. So it is not going to be word for word, but it is going to be the art of coaching, and you're going to go ahead and get your legs with this and feel more comfortable over time. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop into it. Of course, we're going to be starting off with rapport, which is part 0. So it's like, hey, happy Wednesday, Tina. Welcome back. Super excited for our call today. I know sometimes life can be crazy and it takes effort to show up for ourselves. And sometimes it might not seem like a big deal, but just showing up for yourself today is already a massive win. Like I already said last week, we have a lot of exciting things to go ahead and go over. And so I can't wait for us to hop right in. Now, a quick note on this, okay? You don't necessarily want to start off with like, how are you doing, with a tonality here. This is very subtle. I want to go ahead and help you pay attention to this, okay? This is a pro tip, is that what I've noticed many times over the years of coaching is that if you start off and say like, hey, how are you doing, right? How was this last week? The student assumes that you are talking about the program, right? And so what they do is they start to go negative and say, oh, I really struggled this past week, or, this past week, this and this and this has happened. But remember, we haven't yet gotten to part number 1 of the coaching call yet. And so you don't want the student to, in this rapport building phase, to start going into actually like how the last week was for the program. And so when you are building rapport here, if you decide that you do want to go ahead and ask questions about like, hey, how was the family? How's the weekend? All that kind of stuff, try and make it not related to the program, because all of the program related conversation you do want to go ahead and have once you actually get into part 1, and you want to be able to hold the frame so that way you can start off with what's going well, right? You don't want the student to take the frame and then go off on negative land, and then all of a sudden you got to be able to get that frame back. You don't want to do that, okay? So that is a quick note here in regards to rapport. And then we jump into what's going well. And so it's like, okay, cool, let's jump in. Like we said last week, we're going to be talking about what went well. So last time we talked about your 90-day goals, and we talked about your big why and what was important about that and connected to your anchor. So talk to me. What's going well? And so as you already know, we are starting the coaching call off by celebrating what is going well. And remember, we don't want to let the student go down the rabbit hole of negativity. And so if they decide to do that, we can always steer them back to what is working, and you can use the scripting around that in coaching call number 1. So the student's going to respond, right? And then we go ahead and reaffirm that with energy, no matter what it is that they said, no matter how big, no matter how small, right? It's like, wow, in the last 7 days you did da-da-da-da-da, right? And so that's amazing. How exciting. Thank you for sharing. And so it doesn't necessarily even have to be related to the program. They could have made a win that was different from the actual program, and we will still congratulate them for that. Okay, so that is part 1, which is what's going well. And then we go into challenges and obstacles. Okay, so inside of coaching call number 2, I want to make this important note here, is that inside of this specific coaching call explanation, what we are going to do is we're actually going to go into a question sequence that is going to elaborate and go deep on coaching students through challenges and obstacles, okay? Now, you may not actually apply this coaching sequence here in coaching call number 2, okay? So we're putting it here as a reference. So if the student doesn't need it, then you will not have to use it. But then in the case that the student does need it, then you can use it here. But then in the future coaching calls, I'm not going to spend as much time explaining, going around challenges and obstacles, because this coaching sequence is available for you. But I just want to go ahead and make that point, okay? So once we talk about what's going well, we then say, okay, awesome, great job for week number 1, right? Because we focus on the positive. And now we're saying, hey, I'm curious, did you come across any challenges or obstacles? Now, at this point, there are 2 ways the student could answer. They could say, nope, it was very straightforward, awesome, right? So if that is the case, we've gone ahead and color coded it for you. If the student says like, hey, I didn't have any obstacles or challenges, then what we do is we say, cool, how have you noticed, or how are you noticing that this is different than what you have done in the past, right? How are you noticing that what you've experienced so far in the program is different from what it is that you've done in the past? And so this question is worded a little bit tricky because it has an ingrained assumption that what it is that they are doing right now is already different than what it is that they did in the past, right? So it's a phenomenal question. And what it does is that this question really instills the value of what the student is experiencing with you. And it gives the students evidence that change is possible because they're doing things differently than they have done in the past. Okay, so this is if the student did not have any challenges or obstacles when you ask the question. Okay, now going forward in the red, you are going to go ahead and see is if the student did not follow through, what is the question sequence and the coaching sequence that is going to work around that? Now, again, just a reminder, I am expanding on this specifically here in coaching call number 2, but these questions and some of these questions may not be relevant to coaching call number 2, but you are going to be able to use them across all of the other coaching calls as well. So that's why we went ahead and put that over here, right? So the very first thing that we're going to do, if the student did not follow through or if they had struggled with the things they had to do over the last week, is that we're going to get permission. And so we say, okay, the action steps didn't happen this week. I'm so glad that you told me because it gives us a chance to course correct and get better. And so do you mind if we explore for a few minutes what needs to happen differently so we can succeed going forward? Now, a couple of things to notice here, right? The first thing that you're noticing here is that we are saying, hey, I'm so glad that you told me that, right? We're going ahead and from the very beginning, we are setting the expectation. We're going ahead and setting up like, hey, we're so happy that you did this, that you went ahead and told us, right? There is no shame here. We're very happy that you didn't hide it, okay? And then the other thing you'll notice that we didn't say, hey, I'm so glad you told me, it's okay you didn't do it, right? So we are not saying it's okay because we're still kind of putting the pressure on them and say like, hey, you know, it's not good that you didn't do it, right? We're not saying, hey, it's okay you didn't do it. We're not saying that. And so as a result, it's like we're in the middle, right? We're comforting them, but at the same time, the pressure is still there so that we're not letting them off the hook, right? But then here's the other big thing that we're doing is that we're also asking for permission before we explore. This is very important, especially in the beginning of a coaching relationship, because then they feel like, hey, all of a sudden this person is respecting and is asking, and all of a sudden we're on this journey together. You're going to notice the usage of the word we a lot of times throughout this coaching sequence, throughout this question sequence, because you can see it's like, hey, we're a teammate with them. We're an ally with them. We're actually working together to help set up the student for success. So that's the first part where we go ahead and get permission, right? Then the second part of this entire coaching sequence, there's going to be a total of, I believe, 12 sections of this, so that way you can go ahead and get an idea of it, right? The second section is going to be easing the student and shifting your own mindset, okay? So it's going to go in from here and say, cool, great. Now, before we do that, before we explore what happened, I want to make this very, very clear, is that you are in a safe space. There is no one here judging you or shaming you or putting you down here. I'm here for you as your coach, and I want you to know that it is completely natural inside of this program to struggle. In fact, I actually get worried when students don't struggle. And so don't beat yourself up. You know, what happened, or what didn't happen, it doesn't matter. It's just feedback for us to make adjustments this week so we can set you up for success. Sound fair? And so what we're doing in this part is we're easing the students' concerns, and we are shifting our own mindset to go ahead and switch into being compassionate and curious instead of being judgmental, right? Because the truth is that these students are making changes in their lives, and sometimes there are coping mechanisms that are more comfortable for them than actually doing the things that are new that you are recommending for them. So again, remember, this might not necessarily apply here in coaching call number 2, but there are definitely going to be phases and times in your career as an RWP where this is absolutely going to apply. And so we are going ahead and not judging them or shaming them, but instead respecting them and letting them know, hey, it's okay. We can work on getting better from here. And all of this helps prevent the student from getting this feeling of judgment or shame. And these are all things that when a student feels judged or shamed or like they're being overwhelmed, those are all things that make students ghost you because of the fact that they didn't feel that rapport was there. They didn't feel like they were being supported by the remote wellness practitioner. And that's exactly why a lot of times in the past, we've seen many students just completely ghost. And ultimately that is on the RWP because of the fact that they did not support the student the way that they needed to. Okay. So that is second part right there, which is easing the student and shifting your mindset. The third part here is finding out what stopped them, right? So it's like, okay, cool. Tina, what happened? What got in your way this past week? Remember, no judgment, no right or wrong answers. I'm here for you no matter what. We're going to work on this together, right? Now, you may not use these exact lines. Remember, it's heavily dependent on the situation. The script kind of just gives you all of the frames. Now, here, you might also go ahead and have curious exploration because if Tina says, hey, I just got busy. Okay, completely. I understand, right? You use a little bit of verbal mirroring. You got busy. Talk to me a little bit more. What do you mean you got busy, right? So you're doing a little bit of curious exploration here, but you got to be careful is that your curious exploration is geared towards actually understanding the situation and not around judging or going into problem solving mode. It's not like, hey, why didn't you follow through when you said you would? Why didn't you stop, right? Why didn't you make time? All of those kinds of things. Yes, they're questions. Yes, there's curious exploration, but they're coming from a frame of judgment or problem solving mode. And so here we're really asking questions to understand better, and we're just genuinely curious. Like we want to understand why the student was not able to be successful with their action steps. Okay. Then part number 4 on here is reminding them of their powerful why. I'm going to start going a little bit faster here so that we can get through the rest of this explanation. But really what you're doing here is that you're reminding them, hey, in the last coaching call, you mentioned you wanted this because of the fact that this was very important to you, right? So you're going ahead and filling in what it is that they said. This is why it's very important to take notes as an RWP, right? And so my job is to assist you to make choices that are in alignment with what's important to you over the next 90 days. And so I know we talked about this last week, but can you remind me what's important about this big why to you, right? And then we go ahead and use conscious listening and verbal mirroring. So what I hear you saying is that your why is so important to you because fill in whatever they said. Is that right? So you're reminding them of their powerful why because of the fact that they struggled. Okay. And then part 5 is that we clarify the why if needed. So it's like, hey, is there anything that we might have missed from adding in coaching call number 1 to your big powerful why? Maybe it wasn't important enough. Maybe it wasn't a big enough motivation for you. Let's go ahead and touch base on that. Maybe there's something that we missed, right? So that's clarifying the why. And then we go ahead and if needed, we can explain this concept called an MDA, right? Minimum daily action. And so, hey, I want to introduce you to a concept called MDA. MDA stands for minimum daily action. And MDA is the minimum daily action that is almost impossible not to do. And so, for example, like 1 push-up a day. When somebody hears that, they say, oh, that doesn't make a difference, 1 push-up a day. But the reason it's so powerful is because sometimes that minimum daily action really compounds over time. And even though it doesn't sound like a lot, it's a lot better and way more effective than, let's say, doing 10 push-ups every other week. Do you see the difference? And so unfortunately, what a lot of people try to do is they try to aim for the maximum. They set up this expectation so high and they tell themselves, if I can't hit that, then it's not worth doing anything, right? And so what ends up happening is they push themselves too far, too fast. And so at the end of the day, what's more important to that is that being consistent and having follow through on the minimum daily action. And so we can then just focus on saying, okay, all I got to do is my minimum daily action, my MDA. That's it. As long as I do my MDA, I'm a winner. Does that make sense, Tina? Right? So we're explaining this concept here because a lot of times what you're going to find is that the reason why the student was unable to go through on their action steps was because they made it such a big thing in their head. And then as a result, because it was such a big thing, they said, oh, I don't have time for this right now. Oh, it's such a big thing. I won't be able to do this right now. And so they procrastinated it. And so instead, what we're doing is we're doing a reframe and we're shifting their frame to understand, hey, minimum daily action. What is the bare minimum that you need to do consistently in order to be successful, right? So you can see this entire question sequence, this entire coaching sequence is designed in order to be able to help them through their obstacles, right? And then after we explain this concept of an MDA, we then go ahead and ask them and define with them what their MDA is going to look like. So what is the minimum daily action, Tina, that you can pleasurably commit to this week that would make you feel really, really, really good when you do it daily, right? And so what we're doing here now is we're helping them define what their MDA is going to look like. Now, again, remember, this may not be specific to coaching call number 2, but it will 100% apply in upcoming coaching calls. And that's why it's very important to go ahead and mention here. So whatever the student defines as their MDA, we go ahead and take note of that inside of our notes so that way we can hold them accountable to that. From there, we go ahead and go over to part number 8. We identify any obstacles in this upcoming week. So cool, Tina, what might stop you or prevent you from following through or getting your MDA completed in the next week? And then once they've actually identified what that obstacle might be, we help them find a potential solution to that obstacle. So it's like, hey, what needs to be in place this week to help make sure that we can overcome that obstacle so that way you're inevitably successful and nothing gets in your way of doing your MDA daily. And then part number 10, get commitment to prioritize themselves. And so this is a very awesome frame that you can go ahead and introduce here, which is like, okay, now that we've identified what an MDA is, we've identified what your MDA is going to be, we've identified what your obstacle is going to be to get your MDA done this upcoming week. We've also gone ahead and talked about the potential solution for that obstacle. And then from there, it's all about prioritizing yourself, right? So can you prioritize yourself this upcoming week and really bumping yourself up to the top of the priority list, right? Building healthy habits so that way you can go ahead and put yourself at the priority list. Don't worry about everything else. We got to make sure that we are getting your minimum daily action in, right? So that is another very powerful frame inside of this sequence. And then letting go, we can go ahead and help them. Hey, maybe there's stuff on your plate that needs to be let go as well. Let's go ahead and talk about what you might need to let go. And then finally, at the end of this entire question sequence, we go ahead and talk to them about, okay, now that we've gone through these questions, now that we've identified exactly what was stopping you, we've talked about the MDA, we've gone through that entire process, how are you noticing, Tina, that what we just did is different from what you've done in the past? And so the same question that we were using to reaffirm how this is different to the student who didn't struggle with anything, we're using that same question to help the student who did struggle, but now they're reaffirming what it is that they did, this entire question sequence, this entire talk that we had, exactly how it's different. And so it's cementing to them that, wow, you know what? The reason why this is going to be different is because I've never actually walked through and created a plan the way that Coach XYZ actually helped me do. And that is why it is going to be different. And so this entire coaching sequence that I just went ahead and walked you through, it is a little bit sophisticated, right? But it is going to help your students overcome obstacles. But again, I've said this a gazillion and 2 times, and I'm going to continuously say inside of this training and all of the upcoming trainings as well, is that you might need to mix and match as you practice more and more. All of this is going to be kind of like in your subconscious as an RWP that you can go ahead and whip out and know what questions to ask in what sequence the more you practice this, okay? So even though we went through in depth in this training, and you will have to condense and expand accordingly, coaching your students through these obstacles might sometimes take 5 minutes, sometimes it might take 15 minutes. And so it's just going to depend student by student, coaching call by coaching call. And so this entire question sequence is something that you are going to be able to reference multiple times in the future. But for the purposes of getting your practice in, it's just a matter of practicing. It may not even feel necessarily real at this point, but it is going to make a lot more sense when you actually get a student who struggles with their action steps. Awesome. So that is part number 2, which was challenges and obstacles. We now go into part number 3, which is new information. And specifically here in coaching call number 2, that is the blood sugar roller coaster. So this is the first time that we are going to be walking a student through new information. And the biggest thing that you got to know when we talk about new information is that it's very important to make sure that you are constantly getting pulse checks. Now, what is a pulse check? A pulse check is just making sure that your student is actually following along with you and not just nodding their head up and down and agreeing with you, right? So even just having like a yes, and the student says like, hey, does that make sense? And they say yes. But that's not even enough, because their body language and the tonality of their voice might be like, yes, right? And so they said yes. And so a beginner RWP is like, oh, they said yes, I'm going to keep going. And so you got to make sure that you are using the coaching skills, looking at tonality, looking at communication, looking at conscious listening, to make sure that the student is actually following along with you and not just nodding their head. And then all of a sudden you're going through this entire, 10, 15 minute spiel. And then all of a sudden they weren't even paying attention with you. So that's going to be very important, not only for this new information, but all of the new information throughout all of the coaching calls. Okay, so what we're going to go ahead and do is, as we're starting off this new information section, the very first thing we do is we go ahead and get permission. So we say, hey, are you ready for something new? Now, the reason we go ahead and ask for permission is because we're transitioning from part 2 in order to go to part 3. And we want to make sure that the student's headspace is following along with us. We're not just going to go ahead and dump onto them, hey, let's just go ahead and boom, right into the new information. We want to make sure that we're having that transition, and we do that by asking, okay, ready for something new? And then we go ahead and introduce this idea of high and low energy foods, right? So today we're going to talk about high energy foods and low energy foods, foods that give you energy and foods that take away energy. Why is this important? Because the more energy you have, the better you feel and the more motivated you'll be to take care of yourself. Have you ever noticed that when you feel tired or lack any energy, you end up making poor choices? Student says yes, right? Versus, on the other hand, when you feel energized and uplifted and positive, you're able to make more conscious choices for yourself in every area of life, right? Student nods yes. And so what we're going to be working on is getting to a place where we're able to make conscious choices in every area of our life that support us in getting to where we want to go and not being destructive to where we don't want to go. And so we really want to get to a place where we're making these empowered decisions that become just a part of who we are, right? It's just what we do. It's not even a question when we have to think about the decision. It's just a matter of who we have become. Does that make sense? Yes. Awesome. So the same thing with food. We want to make sure that we get to a place that it becomes automatic for us to choose foods that give us energy rather than picking foods that take away energy from us. Does that sound good? And so that's kind of like the introduction of how we go ahead and introduce high and low energy foods. And the reason we're talking about high and low energy foods here in coaching call number 2 is because if we don't actually help the student prioritize and have energy in their life, then they're probably not going to have energy to do anything else inside of the program if they're tired all the time, right? And so the goal of this coaching call is really to help discover how we can help the student double, triple, quadruple, 10x their energy, so that way they actually have energy to do everything else inside of this program as well, okay? Now, a note about quick, fun foods, okay? So foods that give you energy, sometimes some students, when they hear those terms, might think, oh, that means I got to eat like boring foods, right? So depending on their history with like dieting and nutrition and that kind of stuff, they think, oh, I got to get deprived of that. And so what we're going to do is we just explain to the student, if that ever comes up, and we reassure them that, hey, this approach is not about depriving them from their favorite foods. It's about adjusting our default foods. We make our default foods the ones that give us energy and they feed our well-being and all that kind of stuff. And then the exception is that if we want to indulge in like more fun foods, that's the exception. But the default is always giving us energy. Okay, so that's just a quick note. If that ever comes up, I did want to go ahead and add that in the explanation for you there. Okay, so as we continue along inside of this part now, what we do from here is we now go ahead and get into a little bit of a dialogue and talk about the 3-day energy experiment that the student did from the previous week, right? So we say, awesome. Awesome. So do you have your 3-day energy observation activity sheet that you filled out from this last week? Student pulls it out. Cool. So after observing for 3 days this past week, what foods did you notice robbed you of energy, or which foods made you feel sluggish? Now, it's important to note here that you're going to notice that there is a lot of dialogue that is happening here. The reason why there's a lot of dialogue in the new information is because when we get here in a second to explain the blood sugar roller coaster, we never want to be having the feeling, the student never wants to have the feeling that we are lecturing at them. They feel like there was this dialogue that happened back and forth. And so it wasn't like they sat in a class and they're getting PTSD from like, oh man, I'm sitting in a lecture for 4 hours and I got to sit here and just listen to this person, right? And so that's why the dialogue is very important. The other point that's going to be very important here is that as the student is talking about what foods gave them energy over the last week and what they noticed from the observation, you do want to make sure that you are taking note of that inside of your notes, because you are going to be using that later on inside of the call. Okay, so this first section here is about the 3-day energy experiment and what foods took away energy from them. And then we transition into take away energy, but in general. So now, other than this past week, Tina, let's go ahead and talk about in general. In general, what foods have you noticed take away energy for you? But before you answer, remember, there's no right or wrong answers. It's all about your own body, right? So which foods in general would you say you've noticed rob you of energy, and then maybe you enjoy eating them in the moment? Yes. But then after you eat them, they make you feel sluggish. And then the student is going to respond. Make sure you go ahead and take note of that also. Okay, so that was the dialogue piece right before we actually get into the blood sugar roller coaster. And so now we go ahead and introduce the blood sugar roller coaster. And so basically what we say is, hey, yes, exactly. Have you ever wondered exactly why that happens when you eat? Fill in whatever they said, right? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull back the curtain for you today, because it all has to do with something in your body called blood sugar. Now, sometimes some students, when they hear blood sugar, they either say, hey, I have no idea what that is. It sounds too complex. Or sometimes some students, when they hear blood sugar, they say, oh yeah, I already know that already. And they start to check out. But I promise you, stick with me here for a second, because the way that you're going to learn it here in just a second is unlike anything you've ever heard before. And I promise you, it's going to help you for the rest of your life, okay? Because it's important to know that blood sugar is not just like a diabetic people thing, or it's not like an overweight people thing. In fact, every human, no matter their size, their age, or their body type, has blood sugar. And so when your energy goes up and down when you eat, this is the thing that we need to know and learn more about. So don't worry, I'm going to go ahead and explain it to you so that way you can be a master ninja at this and never be a victim of it ever again. Sound like a plan? Now, a couple quick points about this section of the script, okay? Is that right over here, when we talk about, hey, sometimes some students feel a certain way, the reason we're doing this is because as soon as we reveal the topic, which is now blood sugar, some students might have the inclination to say, oh, this sounds overwhelming, or, hey, I already know this is going to be a waste of time. And so what we're doing is when we have this frame, this pre-frame right here, what we're doing is we're alleviating both sides of that, and we're going ahead and really elevating the importance of what we're about to talk about, so that way the student really starts to open up their ear and start to pay attention, because we're now going to go ahead and get into the actual explanation of the blood sugar roller coaster. And then from there, what we do is we go ahead and get into actually explaining the blood sugar roller coaster. So this is kind of like the new information piece of this entire part, right? So it's like, okay, normally when our energy is good throughout the day, when we eat, this is what our blood sugar levels look like. And so this image is going to be inside of your guide. And so it's at this point that you can go ahead and share your screen and show the images as you go ahead and get into this, because visually it is going to be easier to explain, right? So we say, okay, cool. So there are small ups and small downs. And so why does blood sugar go up? From the foods that we eat, the body breaks down the food and turns it into energy, which raises our blood sugar in our body. Does that make sense? Yes. Now, why does blood sugar come down? Because after we eat, our body has to release a hormone called insulin to bring that sugar back into balance. Does that make sense? Yes. So normally our blood sugar goes up and down naturally throughout the day as we eat. But then there are certain foods that we eat that spike our blood sugar higher than normal. And so this is what it looks like visually, right? This is what it looks like visually when our blood sugar actually ends up getting spiked. And of course, what goes up must come down. And so that's when, after it goes up higher than it should, it actually ends up coming down very rapidly, ends up crashing. And so this is what it looks like visually. So when it actually crashes, we have that spike, and then we have the crash. But then when it crashes, we have the urge to have all these cravings because we want to go ahead and elevate our blood sugar again. And so what happens is that we again go ahead and reach for something that is going to elevate our blood sugar very quickly, which only spikes it. And then it goes up and down, up and down. The entire process follows and starts again. Okay. And so this, Tina, is what we call the blood sugar roller coaster. This is what it looks like visually. Okay. So first we have some sort of simple carb or something that really spikes our blood sugar. And then once it goes up, obviously it's going to come down, but when it comes down just as hard as it went up. And so we have a crash, we have all these cravings, and then we reach for something that's going to go ahead and spike it all over again. Okay. Now, me personally, Tina, I love roller coasters, but this is not a roller coaster that we want to be on. Now, obviously that's just kind of like a side joke, right? Regardless of if you want to include it or not, this is where kind of as you develop your coaching style and your voice and you really start to get a hang of this, you can just kind of throw these things in there. So that way you really are kind of adding your own personality and flavor to this, right? So it's like, hey, does that make sense, Tina? Student responds yes. So what this does is it destroys our body, destroys our energy, destroys our choices, because remember, we make crappy choices when we feel crappy, right? And so this is one of the biggest reasons people feel crappy and they don't even know it because they're riding the blood sugar roller coaster. And so the effects of this is like angry throughout the day, mood swings, sugar cravings, energy crashes, depression, anxiety, constantly in that fight or flight mode. And so the more uneven your blood sugar is, the more uneven your mood and energy is also going to be. Okay. So balancing blood sugar is one of the most important things that you can do to reduce stress in your body and allow it to be able to heal and rebuild properly. And then if you decided you want to kind of throw it in there as well, because you have a lot more knowledge about this, but you could even throw in a little bit of like, hey, this is the reason why a lot of people struggle to be able to release the fat and lose the weight, is because they're just constantly spiking their blood sugar and all of their hormones and everything is out of whack. And so their body doesn't feel safe to be able to reduce that fat and reduce that weight as well. And so fixing this is going to fix so many problems in so many different people, and it's going to help you in a massive, massive, massive way as well. Okay. So now as I go into the explanation of this here on the left side, I want you to remember that as you went through module 3, you have such a deeper understanding of this topic, but you can see it's really just a matter of like, hey, very simple, high level overview, just giving them an understanding of exactly what this is. And so this is what we were talking about when we said, hey, we're going to be planting seeds throughout module 3. Well, guess what? This is the time where we actually go ahead and harvest those seeds. And so if you do need to go ahead and look back and review those trainings, look at the guides for those trainings, just so that way you understand the under the hood of these topics as well, this is the time that you can go ahead and do so. Because as you're going to see throughout all of the 12 calls, there was a reason why you went through modules 2 and 3, and it really prepared you to be able to deliver these coaching calls, okay? But you want to remember, even though you have more of an understanding of this, even though you have and know more information, your student doesn't need more information. We are purposely further refining and simplifying what is inside of module 3, so that way we're giving the student the bite-sized knowledge to keep them motivated and interested, okay? And obviously there is a RWP pro tip here as well, is that using the student's name when you are talking to them to keep them engaged. It's like, hey, does that make sense, Tina, right? Really being able to go ahead and use their name in there. This is from an awesome book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, is that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language, okay? So being able to weave in the person's name as you are giving the new information is also helpful. And so as we start to close out this part here with the new information, you really are seeing how simple this actually is, right? You're going to see how simple the new information piece of these coaching calls is because we want to try and make it as simple as possible. We're really in and out. We make it practical and actionable, just enough for the student to know, but no more than that. But obviously we as remote wellness practitioners are always more well-versed in the topic, so we can always answer deeper questions if we ever need to. And so that is part number 3, which is the new information part of coaching call number 2. We then go ahead and transition into part number 4, which is the experience exercise. Now, this is going to also be something that is new for you, because although we did a little bit of experience exercise in coaching call number 1, this is going to be the first time that we are attaching the experience exercise to the new information. And really the purpose of the experience exercise is to really cement to the student specifically what they learned in the new information and cement it to their life specifically. Okay. So this is very powerful to the student and is extremely valuable to the student. So that way it's not just, hey, I got new information and that's it. But here's a very important note about this, is that sometimes you might not have enough time to be able to include a full experience exercise inside of every single coaching call. The reason for that being is because sometimes some students learn quicker, sometimes some students take longer. And so we want to make sure that we are always honoring the student's needs, not our own agenda. It's not like we are showing up to the call and saying, okay, this is the agenda, we got to make it through all of this. No. The student might need some more time to process things, right? And so if they need more time in a certain section, we're able to provide it to them. However, we're also monitoring so that way the student isn't kind of like lollygagging and they're really just going along and like wasting time throughout the call call either, right? So it's this fine balance between being able to really run the coaching call and being able to make sure that you're giving the students space, but at the same time, you are still being able to be effective throughout the coaching call as well. So this is really where the art of coaching comes in. There really is no exact scripting that we can provide for you on this, because you're probably going to mess up a bunch of times until you actually get the timing and you get a hang of the timing. And guess what? That's okay, right? So sometimes some students might actually need more time in the obstacles. They might need more time in the new information, and that's okay. And over time, you are slowly going to go ahead and start getting a hang of this. Remember, this is your product development. This is the thing that you are going to be sticking to. This is the thing that you have in your back pocket that is a $1,200, $2,400, $3,600 product that you are going to be able to deliver and refine over time. And so unless you're planning on literally only being an RWP for like 6 months and then getting out of the industry, guess what? This is going to be your product that you have to be able to refine for years and decades into the future. Imagine 5 to 10 years from now, what is going to happen as you consistently deliver these sessions? It's only going to get better and better and better. So I urge you to go ahead and understand that this is product development, and you got to have a longer time horizon to think about what's going to happen as you are delivering these sessions over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. You can imagine they're going to look wildly different from what they look like right now, and that's only going to happen through repetition, through repetition, through repetition. So that is the important note that I wanted to go ahead and make as we go ahead and now talk about the experience exercise. So what we're going to do here now is, now that we've just gone ahead and finished talking about the blood sugar roller coaster, we're now going to go ahead and connect everything back, right? So it's like, okay, so now that we have a better understanding of the blood sugar roller coaster, let's connect this understanding to the foods that you notice made you feel sluggish, both in the 3-day energy observation and in general. So you said, Tina, that bread and sugar and made you feel sluggish, right? So you're reading from your notes. What do you notice about those foods that make you feel sluggish and their connection with the blood sugar roller coaster? So you can see here, what we're doing is we're now connecting and cementing some of the topics that we talked about earlier in the coaching call to the new information, right? And then what we do from there is we go ahead and switch gears and say, hey, now let's go ahead and switch gears and talk for a second about foods that give you energy. What foods do you notice give you energy? And then the student, Tina, she might say, hey, I noticed that when I eat like greens and when I eat like chicken and that kind of stuff, it gives me energy. And then what we say is, okay, well, how do you feel exactly when you do eat chicken and kale? What do you feel when you are eating those things? Yes, you feel more energy, but what exactly, right? Now, make sure that you are writing down those foods that give her energy, so you are making note of that inside of your notes as well. Now, a quick note on the left side of this scripting over here is that it's very important to make sure that you do let go of judgment and expectation, because when you asked Tina, hey, what foods give you energy? She might say, hey, I noticed that potato chips give me energy. And so if she says that, it's not like you're going to jump in and try to fix that, right? This is a matter of helping the student explore and build awareness around what it is that is important for them. And so this is the difference between information and transformation. It's not about making them wrong. It's about building their own intuition and their own awareness, so that way they can learn their own body. However, I promise you, you are going to find that most people intuitively already know what gives them energy and what takes away energy from them. So it's very rare that you're going to find a student that says, yeah, I drink Coca-Cola and it gives me energy, right? And even if they said that, it's like, okay, well, it gives you energy in the moment, but what do you notice about how it gives you energy maybe 2 or 3 hours later, right? And so you can always have that curious exploration and that dialogue there as well. And then now that we've gone ahead and got a list of foods that give the student energy, we go ahead and connect those foods now to the blood sugar roller coaster as well. So it's like, hey, what do you notice about those foods that give you energy and their connection to the blood sugar roller coaster? So what we did is we first asked the student, what are the foods that take energy away from you? This was early on in the coaching call. And then we explained the blood sugar roller coaster. And then we brought that topic back and we said, okay, now let's connect the foods that take energy away from you and connect it to the blood sugar roller coaster that we just learned about. And then from there, we asked them, hey, what are the foods that give you energy? And then we said, what do you notice about their connection to the blood sugar roller coaster, right? What do you notice? Hey, how does this relate to the topic that we just talked about, right? Do you notice that your blood sugar increases at that time? Does it decrease at that time? Let's just have a conversation about that. And then from there, once you've had that cementing conversation, you go ahead and help put everything together for the students. So you say, hey, awesome, let me go ahead and put all of this together for you. See, the thing is that most diet programs that are out there, they focus focus on what not to eat, right? They give you all these rules and say, hey, don't eat this, don't eat this, don't eat this. And what that does is it leaves us feeling like we're in deprivation and scarcity mode. And so you might have experienced this before when you try to tell yourself, hey, I'm not going to eat, bread tomorrow or whatever. And then at the end of the day, you end up binging on it because of the fact that you were in deprivation mode. And so although that might work for a short period of time, eventually what ends up happening is we give in because there's no pleasure in deprivation, right? It isn't fun to deprive ourselves of something, right? And Tina, have you ever experienced cycles like that before, right? How has that worked for you whenever you've tried to tell yourself, hey, I can't eat this? Now, in this case, if the student says, oh, no, I've never experienced that, then you say, oh, well, you're very lucky because a lot of people experience that. And then if they say, yes, I have experienced that, it's like, yeah, exactly. So you know what I'm talking about. So either way, regardless of what they answer to this question, inside of the explanation, you'll see we've gone ahead and included what are the two ways, and kind of either way, regardless, you're positioned in a very strong way as a coach to be able to go ahead and reply back to their answer. And then from there, what we do is we go ahead and transition into the reframe and really kind of position the strategy that they're going to be having throughout their entire transformation program. So it's like, hey, the strategy that we're going to be using inside of your transformation is that instead of focusing on what you don't get to eat, we are going to be focusing on what you do get to eat. And so we get to say things like, hey, I get to eat high energy foods that make me feel, and then you go ahead and insert what they said about the high energy foods that make them feel, right? It's like, hey, how awesome is that, right? I love feeling that way. And so that way you're explaining to them that this is a completely different shift in the way that most diets work out there, where they talk about deprivation and they talk about being in scarcity mindset versus being in abundance. And then if you decided, hey, you wanted to go ahead and kind of make it fun and say, hey, let's go ahead and say this together, right? Let's go ahead and say, hey, I get to eat high energy foods that make me feel, and then the student kind of, does it with you. That's something fun that you could do inside of the coaching call if you decided you wanted to do so. And then from there, what we do is we go ahead and connect what it is that we just talked about to the bigger picture. So what we do is we say in the script, you'll notice it says, this is how we nurture a healthy relationship to body and food. We train ourselves to feel pulled naturally towards supportive, empowering habits versus self-destructive ones. Does that make sense, Tina? Tina responds yes. Now, I don't want to get all woo-woo mojo jojo on you, but I like to think about this in terms of living life deliberately versus on autopilot sleepwalking. Let me explain. Have you ever noticed that a lot of people in society are just like walking around complacent, sleepwalking through life, almost like living on autopilot, right? Now, you don't pause here too long. You kind of just keep going because you don't want to have a back and forth discussion on this. The student just kind of nods. And so many people today go through life living on autopilot and have forgotten how to make conscious decisions or tap into their inner power. It's almost like they're living on autopilot. This is why we call it sleepwalking through life on autopilot, because they're living in like survival mode, right? They're just trying to survive, kind of just get their head above the water. They're just trying to keep life going. Versus when you're in control of yourself and your life, you're not surviving, you're focusing on thriving, because you are not in the driver's seat deciding what you want to have happen in life. And so when you do that, you feel unstoppable because you're making crystal clear decisions. You feel focused, you're creative, you're patient, you're loving, and you're in tune with your body. This is what we call living life consciously and deliberately. Does that make sense, Tina? And so this is one of the things that I would love for you to get from this program, is really tuning into that consciousness and being able to live life consciously, getting to a place where you feel aligned in every aspect of your life, where you are consciously deciding and choosing to feed yourself high energy foods because you are in control and not just living life on autopilot. And so this program really is an opportunity to get the most out of life, to be able to learn the skills to live a life that allows you to have whatever you want, not only in health, but also in all areas of life. Does that sound like a path that you want to be on, Tina? Right? And then Tina responds yes. And so what we're doing here is we're really connecting everything that we talked about, and we're really kind of making it more than just food. We're making it more than just health. And we're really relating it indirectly to those consciousness and limbic topics that we've talked about so many times before, because ultimately, at the end of the day, this is the reason why people are not able to make change in their life, is because they are not conscious and they're constantly in that habit loop, in that constant limbic loop that they've been doing the same pattern, the same script over and over and over again. And so until we wake the student up from that to realize, oh, wait a second, I have to be conscious to choose something else, it's going to be very difficult for them to be able to make a change. And so what we're doing here is that we're tying in the high energy foods and the choice of choosing high energy foods to this concept of consciousness and being able to decide what it is that they want in life. And this is much, much bigger than just the food, but we're kind of using the food as the connection, as the door to that topic. And then after we we've painted this picture of like, hey, you can have whatever it is that you want in life if you are conscious and you actually choose, then what we do is we go ahead and kind of put a little bit of a spin to that. And we say, hey, even though we've just gone ahead and talked about having an amazing life, the thing is that obviously being able to live a life where you are in control, where you get to decide, where you get to choose, it's something that's going to take practice. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, right? Because so many of us are so used to having life happen to us rather than for us. It takes practice to live consciously and decide what we want. It's not going to happen overnight. And so through this entire program, I'm going to help you develop the skills that will allow you to get there. But it's going to happen step by step. Okay, so for now, we're going to be flexing our consciousness decision muscles by focusing on what we get to eat instead of what we don't get to eat. We want to feed ourselves food that gives us energy and not take away energy. And so unfortunately, people nowadays have made, healthy eating and dieting so complicated, and they've made it a massive billion-dollar industry. But the truth is that it doesn't have to be boring and it doesn't have to be dry. All we're really doing is talking about eating healthy food that tastes great and gives us energy and gives us abundance instead of taking away from us. Okay. And so nowadays there are so many options of this. It doesn't have to be complicated. And we're really focusing on being practical and really focusing on choosing. And then the rest of everything else will take care of itself. Does that make sense, Tina? And then Tina says yes. And all of a sudden, see, it becomes like you are transcending your coaching. You're transcending your remote wellness practice, and you're making it more than just, hey, calories or macros or food. It's like, wait, this is a holistic approach that is sustainable that so many people in society don't understand. And so at the same time, you're reaffirming, hey, the reason why you might have failed in the past is because you didn't try this method. And this method of developing our consciousness and our choice and focusing on energy and focusing on foods that nourish us, that is a different approach. And that's why this time you are going to be successful, right? And so that's what the approach that we're taking here and how we're connecting everything inside of this exercise. And then finally, this is kind of optional if you decided you want to go ahead and touch base on this, but this is something that you can 100% absolutely integrate throughout your coaching calls, where here you're saying, hey, you might be wondering, wow, this is a completely different way to look at life, to look at food, to look at health. If this is also important, how come we were never taught any of this properly in school, right? How come there was never a class about learning what foods give you energy, right? And so unfortunately, Tina, a lot of things have changed since schools designed their curriculums. Did you know that the current school system was created in the early 1900s? We're talking about like 1910, 1920. They used to call them factory schools, where they taught people how to be able to follow instructions and work in a factory. And then back then, life was different. Did you know that today, more people die from food in today's world than from bullets? When we talk about like sugar and being overweight and heart disease and all that kind of stuff, more people die from food in today's world than people die from bullets. That was completely different 100 years ago, right? And so the world has changed so much since the school system was created, and school just has not kept up. And that's a big part of our mission here at NutriFit Wellness Academy, or whatever your remote wellness practice name is going to be, is because we want to create a dent in this issue that school and society has created by not educating us on the skills that we need in order to thrive in this new world. That's why it's so important you are a part of this. Because as you are learning these new skills, this is going to impact every single human being that you ever come across for the rest of your life. Because once you go through this program and have your own transformation, Tina, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be able to go out and help your own family. You're going to be able to coach your own friends through all of this as well. And so that way we can go ahead and really expand this and really help so many people from this. And so now you are a part of this mission and a part of this journey as well. How cool is that, Tina? And so you can see here, then student jumps up and down from excitement. So what we're doing here is we're really connecting them and bringing them as a part of our mission inside of our remote wellness practice. And then on top of that, it really alleviates like, hey, this is not my fault. The truth is that school and society has not equipped us with the skills that are necessary in order to be able to be successful. And so we're kind of easing a lot of the pain that a lot of students come into, which is like, hey, this is all my fault. Something's wrong with me. I'm broken. But it's like, hey, you just don't have the skills. And don't worry, this program, this transformation program, is going to provide you with those skills that unfortunately school and society has failed to really educate everyone around this. And that's really the mission of what it is that we are doing here. And so the best way to make sure that the student feels like they're a part of this is really connecting them and taking this knowledge that they're learning and really connecting it and say, hey, this entire transformation program, it's a part of something much, much bigger. And the truth is that everyone wants to belong. Everyone wants to be a part of a mission. And so this is what this entire process provides. Right now, you can go ahead and sprinkle this in other coaching calls as well, here and there, where you feel it's appropriate to remind the student of the bigger picture, kind of the bigger mission here, just so that way they feel like they're a part of that, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be here in coaching call 2, but this section here is very good to practice. So that way parts and pieces of it, you can condense and expand and put into different parts throughout your entire training program, which is also very helpful throughout this entire process. Awesome. So that actually concludes now this part. When we talk about the experience exercise in part number 4, what we're now going to go ahead and do is we've gone ahead and knocked out parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're now going to go ahead and move to part 5, which is the action steps part of this call. So we say, hey, cool, let's go ahead and talk about action steps. This week, I'm going to be actually having you experiment with foods that give you energy and foods that take away energy. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do that with the 6-day energy experiment. Now, you've already gone ahead and done the first part of this energy experiment, which was the observation. And so this upcoming week, you're going to go ahead and do the 3-day energy experiment, which is going to be where we actually start tweaking the foods that you're going to be eating and to be able to see how that impacts your energy. Now, the big thing here, and then obviously you're going to be able to share your screen and show them the 3-day energy experiment, is that the big thing here is that there's no judgment, only curiosity, okay? You want to make sure that we're just curious. Hey, even if I did end up eating something that takes away energy, let's say, for example, you know what? I know that when I drink Coke and when I eat chocolate or whatever, it takes away energy from me. Even if you end up eating those things, then you don't judge yourself. You have just curiosity. You say, isn't it interesting that I'm choosing to eat chocolate right now? What is the experience that I'm getting from making this choice right now? What is it doing? What is this serving for me, right? Isn't it interesting that I'm choosing to eat this entire bag of potato chips right now? Why am I doing that, right? And so you're just getting curious around this, so that way you can go ahead and get an idea of why you are doing some of these behaviors, okay? So we're just emphasizing that consciousness, we're emphasizing that deliberate choice that we're making, and kind of just breaking that automatic kind of sleepwalking through life autopilot mode, right? And so, Tina, which 3 days do you want to go ahead and experiment this upcoming week with your food and the energy, right? And then you want to go ahead and make sure that you make a note of that inside of your notes as well. Now, a quick point on this that I will go ahead and mention is that as you're explaining this to your student, if you see that the student struggled with completing this from the last week, right? They struggled, and earlier in the call, they said, hey, I don't feel like I really got the best out of the activity, then you can go ahead and assign the entire 6-day energy experiment to be redone over here as well, right? So it might not only be the 3-day energy experiment, you might just do the entire, like, hey, 3-day observation and 3-day experiment. You could go ahead and do that over here as well. So that is the first part of action step number 1. The second part of this, if you wanted to go ahead and to add this on here as well, is, hey, do you have any specific foods that you'd like to try this week to see if they give you energy or take away energy? And so here's where, hey, maybe you yourself as an RWP have certain things that you're like, you know what, I would like for this student to try, maybe some recipes or something like that. You can go ahead and include that right over here, and they can go ahead and annotate it inside of their action notes as well, okay? So that's action step number 1. Action step number 2 here, this is optional. This is up to you. This is going to be around, hey, we're going to go ahead and do the 6-day water experiment. And so water is another big thing that regulates energy and kind of helps people with their blood sugar roller coaster. Let me go ahead and walk you through the 6-day water experiment. So that way they would go ahead and do both of those together this upcoming week. But the big thing here that you need to know as an RWP is that you want to be extremely careful to remember that your student does not need more information. They need more practical implementation, right? And so the big thing here is that even though you might have the option to include this, you want to kind of see, hey, is the student struggling? Where are they right now? And maybe you don't share all of the activities and all of the information that you know already from module 3 here, okay? Remember, you have a very deep toolbox as an RWP that the student can continue working with you for a very long time, because every time they complete a 90-day transformation with you, it's like they've unlocked a new level, a new perspective. They're on a different mountaintop, right? And so what ends up happening is that when the student continues with you after their first 90-day transformation, it's amazing for the student because it's a win-win for them because they got amazing results, and a win for you because you're not having to chase the next student, right? We're going to talk about renewing students later on inside of this module, but a lot of people don't realize this, is that the best future customer that you will ever have is the customer customer that is already working with you. And so it's not like manipulation or we're holding things back from them. It's more so that there's more to the journey that they can take with you if you actually deliver value, right? And so the other important thing about this is that if that kind of worries you and you're like, oh man, but what am I going to go ahead and help them with on the second 90-day transformation? Well, guess what? This is where you are not going to be a remote wellness academy student, right? Because here's what's going to happen is that as you start to develop yourself in this career, you are going to continuously learn and you are going to continuously develop yourself. And so other than the materials that we are providing you here at RWA, you are going to be inspired to continue to work on yourself. And then the more that you work on yourself, the more that you experiment yourself, the more the things that you learn, you will be able to include those things inside of your program as well. Because too many newbie RWPs and newbie coaches think, oh, once I share everything that I have, I'm not going to have anything more to offer. And the truth is that could not be further from the truth. Why? Because of two reasons. Number one, you yourself are going to be continuously learning and growing. And so the things that are working for you, guess what? You just add those into your curriculum. And so that might be right now in health. But then I remember Coach Cole at a certain point, he was starting to add like finances, because what he noticed was that a lot of students were complaining about how like healthy food was expensive. And then he went ahead and kind of helped people start creating budgets inside of his program. And then he started realizing that people were just wasting their money and then they weren't actually purchasing healthy food because of the fact that they were spending their money on like a bunch of other stuff. And so that was something that he found valuable for his own life. And then he started including that inside of his program as well. And then the second thing you always have to remember is that the value of what you offer as an RWP is not information, it's transformation. That is the greatest skill as an RWP, is to facilitate lasting change. And so when you've mastered this ability, your value to the student is really permanent, because what you're doing is you're helping them shift their life, not only their health. And so it's not just a matter of, I've shared all the information. Well, guess what? How much of that information did your student actually implement, right? And so even if the information has been shared, the question is, how much of that information is the student repeatedly and consistently implementing? And so that's where you're able to walk them through some of these obstacles and these question sequences and kind of reframe things for them. And that ultimately is the value of the RWP, all right? And so that's what I wanted to go ahead and talk about when we talk about this water activity here. It's up to you if you decided that you wanted to go ahead and share it, you wanted to go ahead and add it in here. But ultimately, you do want to remember that, hey, it's not about more information, it's about transformation. And so if you feel like, hey, you know what, this coaching call number 2 and the action steps were a little bit light, by all means, go ahead and include it in here, because that is going to be action step number 2. And then finally, you have action step number 3 on here, which is continuing to build on what was covered before. Again, this is optional, but you can go ahead and say, hey, finally, how are you doing with your anchors? How are you doing with your clearing the clutter, right? This week, let's go ahead and double down on those. Does that sound like a plan? And you can go ahead and have that be action step number 3 as well. And then finally, like we do in every single coaching call, we have them repeat the action steps back to us. We help them make sure that they are writing it down inside of their action notes. And we go ahead and ask them where inside of their house they are going to be putting these action notes. So that way they can remember to do their action steps. Okay, so that is part number 5, which is action steps. Part number 6, ahas, insights, takeaways, and appreciations. All right. So we can start to wrap up here. Let's go ahead and finish off the call with some takeaways from our call today. What was something that stuck out to you for this coaching call that was helpful or useful? So we go ahead and have that. Obviously, you are going to be able to look into the explanation. I would highly recommend that you do download this explanation guide and read through it as well. And then finally, we do the closing. As always, remember the rule is we never end a call without a specific next date and time already scheduled. Do not be like, hey, cool, I'll text you, we'll figure out the next time, and then it gets all messy from there. You want to make sure that you already have it booked on the schedule when the student is in front of you. Otherwise, you run the risk of losing the student and literally never hearing from them ever again. I'm telling you, it has happened. And then you're like, where did the student go? You have no idea. And so you want to make sure that you always have the next meeting scheduled, so that way there's an open loop in the student's mind. And then that way they can go ahead and expect that they are meeting the next week. And you let them know, hey, we're going to be following up on all these action steps as well. Awesome. Now that we've gone ahead and concluded the explanation for coaching call number 2, as we kind of close out here and I want to talk to you about your practice calls, I do want to go ahead and make another note about ditching the script, because this is really honestly the hardest thing that beginner RWPs have. And this is the big message that I want you to really start to take home, is that do not be a remote control student. Yes, be a remote wellness practitioner, but not a remote control student, okay? Because being a great RWP and coach means you have to start to understand with repetition the art of coaching. The art of coaching means that you have to be be okay with things not going exactly according to the script or not going exactly the way that you thought they would inside of the coaching call, because at the end of the day, you are dealing with another human being. This is not just you having a conversation with yourself. You're dealing with another human being, and you have to go by their agenda because they are ultimately the driver of their transformation program, right? So sometimes in a coaching call, things might go up and down. Sometimes you might have to expand on things. You might have to condense things on the fly. And so delivering coaching calls means that you got to be okay with uncertainty and being able to pivot during a call. But don't worry, you're going to get better with reps, because remember, skill equals knowledge times reps. And so ultimately what you need to know about this is that the scripts are only there as training wheels to help you find your own voice, okay? Because everything that we are giving you right now in this module is really just the training wheels until you find your own voice, okay? It's really not meant to be the end all be all that you got to stick to this script. The question sequences, yes, they work great. Yes, we've tested them. Yes, we've used them with students for a very long time. But at the end of the day, there will come a day where you will need to mix and match and really be able to figure out, hey, this is what works for me. I'm going to experiment. I got to be able to tweak so that way ultimately I can set this student who is in front of me up for success. Okay, so ultimately there is going to come a point where you are going to have to trust yourself and experiment, because don't say, oh, RWA didn't tell me to do that. I'm going to follow exactly what they said I'm going to do. You want to make sure that you are actually being resourceful and you are not just following things blindly and not understanding the purpose behind them. Okay, so the framework we've given you, yes, we've given you the training wheels, but you are going to have to put in the reps to make them yours over time. Okay, because ultimately this is how you are going to find your coaching style, and this is how you are going to find your voice. And that's only going to happen over time as you experiment and really start to go off-road here and really start to be able to get better. Because the truth is that even we here at RWA, we're always finding out what works better. If you find something that you experimented with within the guidelines and you found success with it, hey, please share it with us, right? We promise we won't get upset. We learn from you just as much as you learn from us. And so this is a group effort together. We are providing the initial pieces, the training wheels for you to get started, but this is not a spoon feeding, follow blindly kind of thing we're talking about. You will have to tap into your own resourcefulness, and with time, you will get better day by day by day. And then finally, the last note I want to go ahead and make here before we talk about the practice calls is the pillars of your transformation product, right? Because even though inside of this entire module, we are putting an insane amount of focus on the training pillar of your product, I don't want you to forget that the training is not your product, okay? The training is just one piece of your product, because too many other coaching programs, or hey, we're going to teach you how to become a coach, they teach their students to do, hey, pay per session or pay per hour. But we already talked about in a previous training how this is absolutely a broken way of thinking. It is an outdated way of thinking. It is an old way of thinking, and it is a broken business model. We've already talked about that in detail in the past, right? So we've talked about how your transformation product includes 3 pillars. And so it's not just the coaching calls by itself. It's not the student community by itself. It's not the support, accountability, the activities, the worksheets. It's the combination of all of those things that creates the synergy. But even though we know the behind the scenes of the synergy, publicly, we never actually talk about the 3 pillars. We never talk about that synergy. Why? Because publicly, like we talked about, publicly, we only ever talk about the transformation and the results. Remember the 4 cardinal rules of your MVP? We talked about this, is that publicly, we only ever talk about transformation and results. We talk about the desired situation, because at the end of the day, people do not care how much you charge per hour or per session, or whether you have 3 pillars, or whether you have 10 pillars, or whether you have whatever. They only care about the value that the transformation means for them. And so you always publicly, when you are talking to anybody about what it is that you are providing, you are always talking about it in the sense of the desired situation. It's never about the features. It's never about the nitty gritty. It's never about the details. It's about the desired situation, the transformation, the results, and what their life is going to look like after they actually give you money or after they join their program. Because at the end of the day, that is the only thing that the customer ever really cares about. And so that's why I wanted to go ahead and very importantly mention that here in coaching call number 2. And I'm going to mention and sprinkle it throughout this entire module, is because I don't want you to forget what it is that we talked about in the beginning of this module. So I do want to go ahead and consistently remind you, because I've seen that beginner RWPs, when they get here to this section, because they're putting so much effort into the coaching calls and into the training, they start to think that, oh, this is my entire transformation product. Remember, it's not. It's just one piece of it that we're perfecting. It's a big piece, but it's one piece that we are learning, and then we're going to be able to put all of this together together and really be able to create this entire system, this ecosystem that really allows the student to thrive and get their transformation. Beautiful. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about coaching call number 2, practice. I'm going to go through this very, very quickly because you are already going to be very familiar with this. Skill equals knowledge times reps. Knowledge you learned from this training. Now you got to go ahead and put in the reps. You are going to be partnering with the same partner from coaching call number 1. So you're not going to shift the partner. You're not going to ask for availability, any of that. You're going to partner with the same partner for this. Of course, we know practice calls are very important for a number of reasons. I'm not going to go through this. I'm just going to fly through this so that way you already know what it is that we are talking about. Now, a couple instructions about coaching call number 2, a couple pieces on here. Number 1, obviously the setup inside of the how to practice calls, very important there. And then a couple important notes. Okay. Number 1, work with the same student from the previous coaching call. Number 2, make it real. And then number 3, here's something different. Thank you call video is coming up. Remember, after coaching call number 3, you will be exchanging thank you videos with your partner. Okay. So that way each of you can really start to be able to put that in your own student wins group. You're going to take what the person, your partner said that was awesome about you. They're going to thank you, right? And you're going to take that video of them and you're going to put it into your student wins group. And so in the back of your head, as you're going through coaching call number 2 right now and through the practice, you want to keep track in the back of your head, what are some of the awesome things that your partner is doing? So that way, when you deliver the thank you video, the testimonial like comments that you want to tell them, you can really boost them up. And so you want to keep that in the back of your head and you're just kind of taking note of that. And then once you get to that thank you video, you'll really be able to boost it up for them at the end of the next call. Awesome. And now switching gears a little bit more here, instructions, obviously make sure that you do not waste your partner's time. Make sure you actually practice the script, practice the frames, practice the outline, everything ahead of time. So that way you are not trying to learn this on the actual call. Make sure that you actually do record. Make sure you set a timer for 60 minutes, exactly the same way that you did the previous call. You are going to be doing here as well. Make sure you switch Zoom links, take a break in between if you need it. If you do end up going over 60 minutes, then make sure you take permission from your partner. That's going to be very important. Decide when you are going to be doing the next practice call together. Because this is coaching call number 2, you are going to also be doing coaching call number 3 with the same partner and then follow the rest of the action steps. Remember, try and get these coaching calls in, these practice calls in, and don't take 12 weeks or 3 months or 50 months to do this. It's going to be very important for you to do it if possible, if your schedule permits. Okay. So you're going to do great. I know. Way to go. I'm really honestly very, 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 very proud of you for even willing to try this. I know, hey, it's like, hey, coaching call, practice coaching call, practice coaching call, one after the other, after the other, after the other. But hey, you're willing to try it because imperfect action over time allows you to be able to get practice, and then practice makes progress. So I know you're going to absolutely crush this. Let's go ahead and talk about your action steps. So number 1, watch and study this training in full, of course. Number 2, save the following documents to the appropriate Google Drive folder inside of your Google Drive. So this is going to be coaching call number 2. And then we have all of the documents, all of the activity is going to be located underneath this training. Number 3, prepare your student action notes. Listen to the call example recording. Practice, practice, practice. If you have any questions about this coaching call, make sure you go ahead and drop it inside of the student community post for this coaching call. You want to go ahead and conduct your practice call with your partner, upload to YouTube, and then go ahead and comment the recording and the takeaways inside of the student community post. And so with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, these are the 9 action steps for this specific training. I am super pumped. I can't wait to see your coaching call number 2 practice call inside of the student community. Let us know if you have any questions, if anything comes up, if you need any help. We are here for you. And this is Coach Yasin checking out. I will catch you inside of the next training.